Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we have got a really interesting show today and a couple of really interesting guests. We're going to be talking about navigating loss as men. And we don't talk a lot about men in grief.
Yeah, we don't. And, you know, there's differences in men, and then there's similarities. So we'll be talking about both of those things.
It's going to be really interesting. But Heidi, before we get the show started, I wanted to tell people that my new book, Open to Love, The Secrets of Senior Dating, is out now. You can get it on Amazon. For you who have lost a partner in your life and are looking for love again, remember the Surgeon General says one of the biggest health issues in the United States today is loneliness, and finding somebody can be key. And it's written by myself and my fiancé, whom I met online at Silver Singles. And we have written the book together because we want to tell you about our journey and our trip and how we've found love after loss. Well, Heidi, you want to introduce second? Oh, by the way, I want to say one last thing.
I was going to say it.
Oh, you were going to say it. Say it.
Okay, all proceeds go to the Open to Hope Foundation.
Right, with the mission of helping people find hope after loss.
Okay, Mom, so as you said, we're going to talk about navigating loss as men with Jon Lefrandt and Warren Kozak, and I will introduce them. They're here right now. Hi, Jon and Warren.
Hi, Jon and Warren. Great to have you.
Yes, nice to have you both here. So I'll introduce Jon first, who's at the furthest away from us. Jon is founder and CEO of Elevia, an industry-transforming text messaging service used by end-of-life businesses to better serve grieving families. Jon is also the founder of For Grief, a multi-platform initiative that offers direct access to the country's most preeminent grief professionals and authors through its numerous on-demand classes, life events, and a For Grief Speakers Bureau. Jon personally experienced the emotional strain and health repercussions following his father's death and recognized the importance of providing assistance to those in similar situations. Welcome to our show, Jon.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on. You know, one of our biggest visits at Open to Hope is adults losing a parent, which is interesting. Yeah. So there are a lot of people who are interested in what you'll have to say about that. And
next to Jon is Warren Kozak. Warren is an author and journalist who has written for television's most respected news anchors, including Ted Koppel, Charles Gibson, Diane Sawyer, and Aaron Brown. He was an on-air reporter for NPR, and his writings have appeared in the Wall Street Journal and Washington Post, among others. Warren is the author of the book, Waving Goodbye, Life After Loss, which my mother has right here.
Waving Goodbye.
Which he wrote after his beloved wife, Lisa, died. Welcome, Warren.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work you have done.
Oh, thank you,
amazing.
Warren.
Absolutely, and if any of you would like to hear more from these two, they've both been on our podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. You can get on Open to Hope.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm also interested, Warren, because I'm a widow of 3 years, so I'm going to be interested to hear you're navigating through that kind of a loss.
Sure.
So why don't we start with you, Warren? Why don't you tell us about your experience with your wife? And
it's been 6 years, 4 months for me, and after around the 5th anniversary, I never expected to write a book about this, but the reason was that right after Lisa died, and that was on January 1st, 2018, a lot of people brought books for me, and a lot of them were written in a very academic style. And what surprised me, I should back up a second, when she was sick, when she was in the hospital, I could take care of her. I took care of our daughter who was finishing high school and going to college. I could do my job remotely, and I was doing everything pretty well. But after Lisa died, my brain just went out to lunch, and I couldn't focus. I couldn't read. So these books were just impenetrable for me. And I thought if I wrote a book in a very, just the plainest English I could come up with, short chapters for people in that first year especially, if I could help them, that would make me feel better.
So how many years was it out before you started writing the book?
It was 5 years out when I started writing it, and now it's 6.5 years basically. The book just came out.
You know, I can understand what you're talking about because, you know, I've been a therapist for 40 years, and I also had my son die 40 years ago, and I just, you know, you'd think I'd pick up these academic books or whatever, but I've been in the grief and loss world for all these years. I could not read a thing. could not read a thing. So I totally get, in fact, I started writing because that's how I kind of make sense of my life, my own life, and, trying to figure it out. So
there was a line that has always stayed with me from the Joan Didion book, and a friend of hers said, after a year, I could read headlines.
Yeah, right.
And boy, could I relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, you shouldn't be driving on the road. I hate to say it, but you do.
You're right.
But you're really kind of out of it. I mean, it's funny, as the years go by, I realize I'm a better driver than I was a year before. I hate to say it.
Well, and I think also when you've had a death, you want to hear about story.
Yeah.
You want to hear about how somebody's gotten through it and how somebody has not only survived but thrived. Because initially, when my brother and my father died, I didn't know how I was going to survive. And sometimes I didn't even know if I wanted to because the pain is so intense. So hearing people that are further down, I think, is a lifeline.
Yeah, you pick up little things that you identify with. Mm-hmm. So, Jon, tell us about your experience.
Yeah, so for me, it's been about 15 and a half years ago, and it was my father that passed away. So I served a mission for my church, and I was in Sendai, Japan, living there for 2 years, and my dad and my mom and my sister were supposed to come to Japan to pick me up, and we were going to spend 10 days touring the country, and then about 3 days before they were scheduled to arrive, we found out that my dad, at 43, had stage 4 brain cancer.
Wow.
And I'm the oldest of 7 kids, and so we changed the plans, and I rushed home and got to the hospital right as he was coming out of brain surgery, and that started kind of our journey and battle with cancer. And he fought cancer for about 3 years and then eventually passed it at 46.
Wow.
So
that's tough because that's a long time to have brain cancer. So his age and the support of his family are obviously what kept him going that long. So that must have been a Herculean effort.
I think that for the youngest, who was 6 years old especially, I think it was so devastating, obviously, and I think he fought probably for the kids, of trying to be there for any milestones that he could, and it's I think when you're in your 40s especially, it's just such a tragically young age for that to happen.
How old were you?
I was 25 when he passed.
Yeah. So you were young.
I was
young. To have your dad.
Yeah.
I was thinking, coming from a mission, being away for 2 years, and that's a big adjustment in and of itself.
Absolutely.
And then coming
well,
into
and when
the
you
culture.
think about that, we had pretty strict, missionary rules. Back then, we only were able to talk to our families on Christmas and Mother's Day. Those were the 2 dedicated times of the year.
Right.
And so when you think about my interactions with him, I was probably 19 the last time that I had any meaningful interaction with him. Yeah.
And Warren, I'm just wondering, how long was your wife sick?
4 years, almost
So
exactly.
in both cases, it was not that long.
Yeah.
From the time that they were diagnosed to the time that they died.
Yeah. So your wife had cancer also? Or?
She had cancer. She had a very rare form of cancer with a ridiculously long name, Waldenstrom's macroglobulin anemia. That was a mouthful. Yeah.
I've never heard of this.
And it's rare, and it's not a killer cancer.
Okay.
But the problem was that of that tiny number that gets Waldenstrom's, a tiny number gets amyloidosis. And Lisa was a physician, and she was a really smart physician, and she knew she had amyloid, and I didn't quite understand that when it was confirmed, that was a death sentence. And I kept going, thinking, no, it's going to be okay, this one, and no, it wasn't. And the last 2 years were pretty awful. It was mostly in the hospital.
Wow. How old was she when she died?
She was 59.
And how old was you had a daughter, you have a daughter, and how old was she?
Claire was 19.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking with men and grief, one of the things that I've noticed is that sometimes men try to support women. And I know you really were in there for your mother, right?
Yeah.
And you were in there for your daughter.
Sure, of course.
Yeah. Do you see that as a male role fitting in grief and loss? Are men able to break down and get as upset as women, or they?
No, Yeah, I think it was multifaceted. I was there helping my mom, but then because of the siblings, I felt the need to step in and be strong and stable and steady kind of through the chaos of battling cancer and then the aftermath with death. But, with my story, it was about 5 years after my dad died. And by this point, I'm married and have kids. And my wife finally, it just had wreaked enough toll in my life that she's like, we are going to find you some help. And it just always felt so daunting to me to what am I supposed to do? Go to Google and type therapist. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't bother asking until it had wreaked enough havoc in my life that my wife finally said, enough is enough.
Tell us what the havoc was. What did that look like?
For me, it was definitely debilitating anxiety and depression symptoms, which I had never had prior to that. And so those were manifesting themselves. And I think, at that period in my life, my dad was a commercial real estate developer, and he died in September of 2008, which was the recession. And so that really impacted that industry. I got my master's in real estate development. So professionally, things were very challenging. The economy was challenging at that time, and I'm newly married and have young kids. And there was a lot of just heavy, I think, during that period. And so it got to that point where just happiness and even being able to feel like my wife was like, I've never even seen you cry. And after I did eventually get help, then it was the waterworks, it was like, oh, here are the tears. They had been held up for all that time, just trying to keep it together.
Just one last question about this. Who did you get help from, and how did you do it? Because I know people get in touch with me and say,
how do you start?
What do I do?
Yeah.
How do you know which model, and how do you know, what to do?
I mean, I had never been to see a therapist before, for example, and I thought, well, that's the avenue that I need to go to. And there were multiple times I would attempt, and I'd go to Google and I'd search therapists near me, and there's this great abyss of, I don't have time to sit down with each of these individuals to find out. And I actually reached out to a friend who was a therapist, and she lived in a different state, and she helped me narrow it down and find a directory and look at different profiles and what things were important, male versus female, religious preferences, etc. And we kind of narrowed it down, and it changed my life forever, her help. But I got the right person that was able to kind of extract me from that place and help get me on the path to some semblance of healing, for sure.
Well, and I think, okay, so now you're with a therapist. Now you can kind of be more vulnerable and let down, because you're not trying to take care of your children, your family, your other family, which is your mother, your siblings. I mean, you're kind of,
Absolutely. Yeah, he was amazing. And I just remember when it finally...
I like that it was a guy, too.
I know. And it was awesome. He was terrific.
I'm thinking you had lost your dad, and I don't know, maybe there was some reparative work that could be done. I don't know.
Yeah. He was fantastic. He was exactly what I needed, and I felt that pretty strongly when it finally kind of cracked open that shell and said, let's dive into what's inside there, and it changed my life. He was wonderful.
How about you, Warren? What did you do through the journey?
The first year, I'm lucky I didn't get arrested, frankly. No, anger would come out, and I had almost no control. If I got pissed off at someone, I would say something. Claire was away at college. She was in her sophomore year when her mother died, so I was home alone for a lot of the time. I actually contacted Lisa. I was not a believer in therapy. And Lisa had a therapist for a long time who had a very positive impact on her life. Lisa lost her mother when she was 12 and had a father that was, the best I can say is he was probably the least likely candidate to have 3 children under his own tutelage. And it was like her mother that held her family together. I called Lisa's therapist. Well, actually, I didn't call her. I wrote to her, and I said, I'm having a problem. Can you suggest someone? And she said, let me think about this. She suggested someone who was just the right fit for me. And I said I wasn't a believer. I am now. I still see him. He's been a tremendous help and a guide. One of my concerns was I was really worried that Lisa was such a good mom. And I thought, how am I going to do this on my own with Claire? And he kind of gave me the I'm trying to think of the word. I suddenly can't. But he basically said, "You're doing okay. You're doing okay. You said the right thing. You're doing the right thing with her." And I will say that my relationship with Claire was always very close, but we have grown very, very close now. So.
I love this. It reminds me of when I worked with the 9/11 widows in the fire department after 9/11, because I worked with them for 10 years. And what we didn't realize as therapists, that part of our job was going to be helping them now that they were the only parents. Like they would bounce things off of us. They would say, "Do you think this is right?" Because they used to go to their spouse and do that.
Exactly.
So it's interesting hearing this. And you're both bringing up a really good point. Goodness of fit is everything.
Yeah.
And if we're always saying, if you go to a therapist and you don't feel it's a good fit, you go somewhere else.
Yeah.
I will say I saw someone for 2 sessions before, and it wasn't the right fit. So that's why I was so lucky to get.
And I think that there's ones for different times and seasons in your life.
Good point. Really good point.
It's been 15 years for me, and I've had to re-engage on what kind of havoc is grief, wreaking in my life, and I've needed somebody different for this chapter. So, yeah.
That's a good point.
Well, when Phil died, I thought, I'm going to take my own advice. What would I tell myself as a therapist? And what would I, if I was sitting across and I'm like, you really need to get some support. So I called an organization in Palo Alto called CARA, and I knew the director because we've done a lot of stuff with him. And I called up and I said, "Jim, I don't think you're going to be able to find a therapist for me." I said, "My son died 40 years ago. I've been in this field for the last 40 years, and I'm a therapist, and now my husband dies." And so a couple of days later, I get a phone call, and they say, "We've got a guy for you." It's a free program, actually. It's very cool. Whose wife died, kid died, and he trains a therapist at CARA.
So he had the same losses. I mean, he had a
Wow.
spouse
All the
loss
same
and a child
losses.
loss.
So it was very. But I spent a lot of time with him, saying, "Is it okay that I'm okay?"
Yeah.
Trying to, because I talked to, people are impacted differently by grief, and I knew enough about the impacts of all around that I'm like, should I be, freaking out? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing that?
So you thought you should be worse than you were?
Yeah, I thought I should be worse than I was.
So you were judging your own grief?
Yeah, exactly. I was sitting around trying to
people do.
analyze
Oh,
it.
yeah.
We're damned if we're doing too good, or we're damned if we're not.
Exactly.
It's like people can judge us.
Yeah.
You're still grieving, or you're not grieving enough.
Exactly. And circumstance, where your dad was sick for a long time and almost died 2 years before, and,
Yeah.
so a different.
And people will judge you.
Yes. Fast forward now, Jon, you mentioned earlier that you had a health crisis that came up and had to get somebody different. What exactly happened?
Yeah, so it was actually last year, and I'm like you. I work now in this space. I work with the funeral profession, cemetery, pet loss, hospice, centers. I'm around death a fair amount, and I thought, I've been through therapy. I got this conquered, and last year I ended up in the ER not once but twice, and I had 2 anaphylactic shock episodes. And the first one I thought, well, what am I allergic to? I didn't know I was allergic to anything. I thought it was grapes because I had been fasting that day, and the first thing I ate was grapes. But the common denominator of the 2 was my dad's birthday and then his death anniversary.
Wow.
So 3 months apart from each other, and both landed me in the ER 15 years after my dad died. So then I'm like, all right, time to dive in and figure out what's going on inside 15 years later. And I've had amazing people now that I'm in this kind of grief ecosystem with my grief work that I'm able to call. Her name is Megan Reardon Jarvis, and I know she's been on your show, and she specializes definitely in the physical effects of what happens to your body with grief. And I'm like, Megan, is this possible? And she's like, absolutely.
So at first you didn't connect it.
No. I thought it was peculiar on the first one. I had family over, and they were out in the back, and we were getting ready to sit down for dinner to celebrate his birthday. But it was literally on my first bite that all of a sudden I broke out into massive hives. And so you would think that it was food related.
Yeah.
But Yeah. So I suspected. I knew it was a hard and kind of those days. I recently moved back closer to where my dad's buried, and it's about 1.5 miles from my house is all, and I hardly ever go. And I was feeling guilty for that, especially as a father. My kids didn't know my dad because my oldest was 10 months old when he died, and feeling guilt that I'm not taking them there. I'm not doing a good enough job of honoring and remembering his life, and I think that just kind of, and my business is the things.
So again, you're judging your grief.
I am.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
My mother judged her.
Absolutely.
I should be doing this and I should be doing that.
Yep.
This is how I should be.
And Warren, what about you? Have you seen any health issues or any struggle with any of that or not?
I've been very fortunate,
good.
knock wood,
Yeah.
health. I lost a lot of weight right after Lisa died. I lost like 30 pounds, and I got to the weight I was at high school.
Wow.
And people would say, "You look great." I said, "It's the grief diet. You don't want to do it. Don't even try it." No, but I've been very fortunate.
And it sounds like the anger is dissipated, right?
It has. It
and
really
what do you attribute
has.
that to? Is it talking about it, or is it time, or is it?
I think it was
therapy?
time. It was, and what I write in the book is putting the gratitude above the loss and the gratitude of just having this incredible marriage. You know, a lot of my friends don't have good marriages. Unfortunately, I have a child. A lot of people would love to have children. They haven't been able to. I have a career that I get a great deal of satisfaction, and I have my health. So if I say most days I can put the gratitude over the loss. Not every day, but most days.
I like that.
I do too. Yeah. So, what is your take on men in grief? Oops.
You want me to answer that?
You go first. After you, John.
Oh gosh, I think that men and grief, it's terribly complicated. I think, to your point, you were talking earlier, a lot of the material that's out there is written by women and from a woman's perspective, and I think that's probably because men don't open up a whole heck of a lot about their grief. And it's like peeling back the layers of the onion often, and you discover new things about yourself that you didn't know were there, new needs that you have that you didn't know that you needed. I think it brings a lot of those kind of to the surface. And I think that it's the discussion of it, though, talking to other men that have had loss in their life, and it's in those conversations I think we learn even more through it of what those needs are, what pressures are there as parents potentially, or friends, or depending on what type of loss too. For me, with my father, I think the other part of where the anaphylactic came into play was because I was turning 40. And my dad died at 46, and he was diagnosed at 43. So I have this
The 40
in my
represents
mind,
the 40s and what happens during your 40s.
It's this ominous, like, am I going to live longer than my dad? Will I, and even though I can rationally tell myself that that's not true and that's not going to happen, it still is this internal fear. And I think that's pretty common for men too, when they lose their fathers especially. I've heard that.
How about you, Warren?
I received some amazing emails from friends, male friends, and I put those emails into the book. And one of them said, and I love this analogy. He said, dealing with grief and loss is like fingerprints. Everyone's fingerprint is different, and everyone deals with it differently. And you shouldn't judge yourself. It's going to be different. I went to a grief group right at the beginning. People suggested go to a grief group, and it didn't work for me. And one of the reasons was that there were 12 people, and there was only one other guy, and there were 10 women. And I found, first of all, there was so much pain in that room that it made me feel awful. You could bottle it. It was, and I just felt so bad for everyone there. But the women talk, even though we were all grieving and we all lost spouses, they were talking about things I couldn't relate to. They said they felt a loss of physical protection. And I was thinking, I miss so many things about Lisa, but I don't, even though I said that if Claire or I had been threatened, she would have fought like a banshee to protect us. But that wasn't something I worried. I missed. she brought beauty into the house. You know, she brought flowers, she brought lace curtains, she brought all this cool stuff that I just complained about. Yeah, I said, why are you spending so much money on this? And I miss that.
She brought her body too, just holding, hugging,
Sure.
being is a hard thing to miss. Yeah. So, if you had some advice for a guy who's newly bereaved from a dad, an adult losing a parent, what would you say?
An adult losing a parent, I think the biggest thing is to talk about it with someone. I don't know who that is. For each individual, it's probably different, but it is the communication. I think that sometimes men want to just shut down and they hold it all internally, but to your point, when a friend reaches out or talks, that's where you do discover those things, and that it's okay. Whatever it is that you're feeling, it's probably more common than you think, and there's not something wrong with you, right? But the communication, I think, is probably the biggest key. Find somebody that you can at least open up to.
How about you, Warren?
I think my biggest surprise was that I had to reinvent myself. I was not the same person after Lisa died, and I had to figure out who this new person is, and I'm still evolving. I'm still working at it, and there have been a lot of screw-ups along the way, but I think there was one day I was walking down Madison Avenue. It was a gorgeous October day, just one of those perfect days, and I had this amazing music on my AirPods, and I realized something. I realized, holy cow, I'm happy. And I'm happy to be alive. I'm happy to be enjoying this day. And I didn't think I would ever feel that way again. And that was and it wasn't anything special. I didn't win the lottery. It was just a gorgeous day, and I was grateful for it.
That's a big deal, because in both cases, with both my brother and my father, initially I felt like the best part of my life is over. It's ended. Like, there'll be other parts, but the best part is gone. And then, you know, with positive coping skills and support, I've realized that's not true. There's still good things ahead.
Okay, so where can people find you on the internet?
I'm at warrenkozak.com, and the book is Waving Goodbye.
And get it on Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon.
Right. How about you, John?
And you can find me at forgrief.com. That's where all of my grief-centered work is, and trying to help people just as people helped me.
So thanks for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And I want to thank everybody for joining us on the show today. And I want to remind you all, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.